So I am very proud to announce that on September 3rd, the Starlink launch went perfectly, absolutely flawlessly from Cape Canaveral. Well, actually, I can't say that for certain. Watching this video is about the only thing that shows me with absolute certainty, assuming that it's not faked, that this launch went off properly. Because even though I was just over 10 miles away from the launch and had a perfect viewing location to see the Falcon 9 take off, I saw nothing except the sun glaring in my eyes and my video camera pointed in just the wrong location. I mean, it had been well over 15 years since I'd seen anything launch from the Cape, and I had never shot anything from that angle, so I really didn't have any idea where everything was in relation to everything else. But oh, what the hell, I'm making excuses. I completely blew it, and anybody who was unfortunate enough to watch that live stream knows it. But while I was dealing with this personal debacle, SpaceX fans across the world were treated to not just one, but two launches. Well, the second one was a hop rather than a launch, but SN6 went off pretty well. There was a small fire at the end of it, and we're not exactly certain as to all of the results, at least at the time of me shooting this, but nevertheless, it went very, very well and was an exciting thing to watch, but I didn't watch this as it happened either, because I was busy doing something else. I was at Kennedy Space Center gathering information on the history of NASA, and in the process of doing it, I learned a few very important things. While there, I got to see NASA in all of its glory, from the Space Shuttle Atlantis, man, that was amazing, to a mock-up of the Hubble Space Telescope, which, in spite of its initial flaws, has accomplished amazing things to this day. And it left me realizing that what Boeing has planned for NASA next is not worthy at all of this amazing organization's history. So in this episode, we're going to cover the history of NASA, or at least some of its highlights at the Kennedy Space Center and in the city of Titusville, and how Boeing is putting all of that at risk. So I know I had a final chapter, but get ready for a new beginning of Boeing Blows. This is an all too common sight in Florida, and this little guy just happened to pop up while I was getting ready to shoot my intro for this video. And this is not an uncommon sight at all in Florida. There are a million alligators in this state, and this little guy just happened to pop to the surface before I got things started, and I absolutely had to show this to you before I began my broadcast. Pretty damn cool. So now that we've had a nice good look at the alligator, hello and welcome for an unusual event of the Angry Astronaut. As you can hear, there's extensive construction going on in the background, but I am talking to you from Space View Park in Titusville, which has nothing to do with the Kennedy Space Center. Rather, the city of Titusville erected this park to commemorate the accomplishments of all of the astronauts astronauts who have explored space since the early 1960s. And let me tell you something, it's quite a moment to be standing here, because although I have visited the Kennedy Space Center a number of times, I've never been to this park. So I'm going to be bringing you highlights from the Kennedy Space Center and sights from this park as a reminder, while all of us watch the Falcon 9 and the SN6 and ooh and ah over the accomplishments of SpaceX, we need to remember that Elon Musk is standing on the shoulders of giants. Yes, he is making space more affordable, but he would not be at this point. He could not possibly be making this attempt to make space more affordable. And sorry, I had to keep glancing over at that gator every now and then just to make sure he's still there. Plus, I have to admit, I'm about to die of heat stroke at the moment, but I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's go ahead and look in depth into the history of NASA and everything that the city of Titusville and the Kennedy Space Center has done to commemorate their accomplishments and also what's to come. Okay, in the midst of recording all of that, I was so excited that I forgot to even mention these guys. And I mean, why would I even want to mention them, right? But when it comes down to it, Titusville is a city completely devoted to the space program and to Apollo. They have monuments to this program everywhere, such as this one, which obviously is dedicated to Apollo, not to Artemis, in spite of the similarity of the logos. But in this park, you can find the handprints of some astronauts you may never have heard of, such as Charlie Duke from Apollo 16, who was the youngest man to ever walk on the surface of the moon and lives in the city of Charlotte, 90 minutes away from my home. Or Paul Weitz, who sadly died back in 2017, who was not only on Skylab, but also commanded the Space Shuttle Challenger on its maiden voyage, which means I got to see this guy go into space in person. Then there's Frank Borman, who not only was the commander of Apollo 8, the first vessel to orbit the moon, or manned vessel anyway, but also he set an endurance record on the Gemini 7. And by the way, speaking of Apollo 8, it was on this particular mission when this iconic photograph known as Earthrise was taken. And we have marveled at this photograph ever since. And then there's Jerry Carr, who never got to go to the moon. He always got bumped until the program was canceled, and yet he spent more time in space than any of his Apollo colleagues, at least the ones who went to the moon. He set an endurance record along with his crewmates on Skylab of 84 days, and during that time they stayed extremely busy. Carr and his colleagues carried out 56 different science experiments during their time on Skylab, and Carr himself logged 15 hours and 51 minutes in 3 different EVAs. And speaking of EVAs, the first man to successfully carry one out was Alexei Leonov, and his handprints are here as well. And this guy had a lot of things in his list of accomplishments. For example, the Apollo-Soyuz mission. He was present during that historic event in 1975, an orbital docking that is not really dissimilar to the planned Starship refueling docking that will be taking place hopefully sometime in the near future. But his spacewalk also had its issues. During that time, the suit started to inflate to a point to where he couldn't get back inside his capsule, and he had to vent atmosphere out of his spacesuit in order to be able to re-enter. The man nearly died in the process. So, on my way to the Kennedy Space Center, this was waiting for me on the main road. Yes, there's not just one, but 2 massive Blue Origin buildings on the property. Well, close to the property anyway. And in the lobby, there's a capsule for their new Shepard rocket. intended for space tourism, I think. I asked for permission to take a photograph, and they told me to take a flying leap. Seriously, they were really, really rude. I think they might have seen some of my older videos. Hard to say. So anybody who's seen the Kennedy Space Center has seen the Rocket Garden, a collection of vehicles that date back to the early beginnings of the space program. No Saturn V's here. Very, very old stuff. If you like old rockets, this is the place for you. From the Juno 2, which transported unmanned missions all the way to the moon in the late 1950s, to the Saturn 1B, which you can see in the background. Oh, you want to see it a little bit more up close? Well, how about that? This is the last remaining intact and flight-configured Saturn 1B left on the planet. It's in the middle of restoration, but in any event, it launched the Apollo 7, which was the first crewed mission of the Apollo program. And then after the Apollo program, this rocket also launched 3 missions to the Skylab space station. But if Mars is your thing, on September 8th, I will have the honor of interviewing Dr. Gilbert Levin, who was in charge of the label release experiments on the Viking spacecraft. In other words, the experiments designed to detect the presence of bacterial life. And if you want to ask Dr. Levin a question, see the description in this video for details. But if rovers are your thing, the Kennedy Space Center has mock-ups of just about every one of them, such as the Opportunity and Spirit rovers, which most significantly detected the presence of water, or at least conclusive evidence of past water, and also a magnetic component that was identified as some sort of magnetite with titanium, and the fact that this dust seems to cover the entire surface of Mars. And then right next to this rover is the Sojourner, the little bitty rovers that we sent back in 1997. Now, in spite of its tiny size, the solar-powered Sojourner was equipped with several cameras and a device called the Alpha Proton X-ray Spectrometer, also designed to measure the composition of the Martian soil, the little rover that could. Then we have the Curiosity, powered by the decay of nuclear isotopes and the heat they generate, and this rover has discovered more than just about any other: the presence of methane in the atmosphere, the fact that the radiation levels on the surface of Mars are not nearly as intense as we thought, especially close to cliffs, and also the presence of organic molecules, which we thought weren't there. And then finally, we have the Perseverance, that has a sample caching system that collects rock cores, which are drilled by the robotic arm, a turret, which you're looking at there, which holds heavier science tools, and 23 cameras, some of which can deliver some extremely detailed photographs down to the size of a grain of salt. But for the most part, it's just like Curiosity. And then there's Ingenuity, a 1.8 kilogram helicopter that's designed to fly for a maximum of 3 minutes to a distance of around 300 meters at maximum. Nevertheless, it could allow future helicopters to access areas that rovers cannot. But this is essentially a test model that's going on Perseverance. But forget robots, how about manned expedition? Well, here's the Space Exploration Vehicle, which can serve as a radiation shelter, has durable tires designed for all-terrain conditions by Michelin, has a theoretical range of 125 miles, and ingress-egress ports on the back of the vehicle to allow astronauts to get into and out of the vehicle in 10 minutes without exposing it to dust. And by the way, they decided to take this concept up a notch. Have a look at this vehicle concept. The Mars Rover Vehicle Navigator, or MRVN, was designed to be a mobile laboratory. And by the way, this was done without taxpayer dollars. It was done purely off of the Kennedy Space Center's revenues from ticket sales and that sort of thing. And if you look at it from a side angle, some of the ingenuity in this design becomes apparent. The front section can detach from the back section, allowing the front to scout out the terrain while the scientists in the back conduct experiments in their mobile laboratory. And the whole thing is perfectly functional and mobile. This is not just some kind of model set up for a display. This thing can actually move. And here's the interior when it was taken out on a joyride on a particular show which I can't talk about without getting demonetized. Still, given Elon Musk's decisions when he designed the Cybertruck, I think that he'd kind of like this thing. In fact, I liked it so much that I got one of my own, and like the real thing, this is mobile as well. As a matter of fact, after I'm through making this video, I might take it out for a joyride myself. Changing the subject briefly, I want to talk about Gemini 9A very quickly. This tiny capsule was designed for a crew of 2, unbelievably. Not very spacious at all. And on the fated flight of Gemini 9A, Gene Cernan and Tom Stafford had a brush with death when they undertook an EVA, and Gene Cernan on many occasions nearly did not come back alive. But that deserves a video all its own. And the reason I decided to transition into sort of a serious mode at that point is because of the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle Atlantis, which was on magnificent display at the Kennedy Space Center, is to me a symbol of where NASA went wrong. Where NASA started to move towards reusability, towards a moment of brilliance, but instead ended in failure. And so many things about this vehicle went flawlessly. This docking port, for example, was used to dock not only with the ISS, but also with the Mir space station, and never, ever did this huge vehicle cause any problems to the stations that it docked with. And so many other components perform flawlessly as well, such as these reaction control engines on the rear section of the ship, allowing for precision maneuverability in orbit, which was necessary since the shuttle had to dock with all sorts of satellites and the Hubble Space Telescope, to say nothing of the space stations that it had to dock with, all without any serious issues. And although the shuttle's heat tiles get a fair amount of grief from people including myself, it is worth noting that the Atlantis made one landing after another without one incident. These tiles held up extremely well, especially given the enormous size of this ship and the colossal amount of heat that it generated, and the fact that this was the first time that reusable heat tiles were being employed. And check out this cockpit window, struck by countless micrometeoroids over the years, and yet it shows no signs whatsoever of wear. So incredibly resilient and providing a tremendous amount of visibility for the pilot, who absolutely needed that on his approach, because since this was a glider, he didn't get a second chance. And the engine setup also reusable, the large engines being the RS-25 main engines for the takeoff, and the small ones being used for orbital maneuvering. These were all reusable, were removed from the shuttle after every flight and repurposed for another launch. Really not terribly different than how things are handled with the Falcon 9. So where did things go wrong? Why did people get the idea that instead of reusing this incredibly reliable engine, that we should throw it away and let it burn up with the SLS every time it launches. It's absolutely insane, and any engineer that would have proposed that back in the days when they were designing the space shuttle would have been given a one-way ticket out of the industry. I mean, these tiny little pits on the heat shield for Atlantis were about as bad things got for the shuttle. So why the disasters? Why did these things take place? Well, in short, it's because NASA stopped being so thorough and started getting sloppy. And instead of talking about details and assigning blame, I'm just going to name the people who paid the ultimate price for what they dreamed in. Commander Rick Husband from the Columbia, William McCool, David Brown, Kaplana Chawla, Michael Anderson, Laurel Blair Salton Clark, and Ilan Ramon. And from the Challenger, Dick Scobie, Michael Smith, Ellison Orizuka, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and of course, Krista McAuliffe. And though I will not show any of the shots of the disaster itself, this piece of wreckage from the Challenger, together with these cockpit window frames from the Columbia, serve as a grim reminder that to our knowledge, neither crew was killed instantly in spite of the force of the explosion. Both of them suffered harrowing seconds of terror and God knows what else, because the people that they trusted to protect them, the people they trusted to keep them safe, failed. And as we return to Spaceview Park, we can see that the people of Titusville and the people of Cape Canaveral have not forgotten what happened on those 2 awful days, and they continue to leave their tokens of remembrance at the shrine at this park that's dedicated to the memory of these people. And as I took this picture, I realized that it would be inappropriate for me to not leave something of my own. And so I did. And what is Boeing doing now? And what is NASA planning to do now to honor the memory of those who gave their lives to make space accessible to everyone? Well, what they're doing is taking this technology that was so painstakingly designed to be reused and repurposed to give man access to the stars and letting all of it burn up in the atmosphere at the cost of billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars and putting the entire future of NASA's space program at risk. It is an absolute atrocity. And before I go on about it anymore, let's go back to Spaceview Park and talk about something a little bit more positive. Let's forget about Boeing, let's forget about the SLS, and instead talk about how SpaceX is going to use NASA's achievements to eventually carry out what these brave people wanted in the first place. So, I had an opportunity while I was at the Kennedy Space Center to speak to a very nice elderly lady. And you please excuse me, I've got sweat just streaming into my eyes at the moment, and I hope you can hear me clearly over all the background noise. But in any event, I spoke to this elderly lady, and her son works for ULA. And I held my tongue, of course, and of course there's a little bitterness in her voice when it comes to SpaceX fans and all of their attitude about ULA. And she brought up one very important point. Look at all of the things that ULA has accomplished, all of the spacecraft that they launched in order for us to gain the knowledge of the solar system that we currently have. Without ULA, we wouldn't have a tenth of the knowledge that we currently have about the solar system. And we would be starting all over again. SpaceX could be, launching probes and launching rovers to Mars at a much reduced cost, of course, but we'd be starting over when it comes to our knowledge of space, to say nothing of all of the manned exploration that took place under ULA's watch and Boeing in the days when they actually did things that were worthwhile. And I'm talking about the Saturn V and pretty much nothing else. But in any event, we need to remember that many space companies have accomplished quite a few big things. I think SpaceX is heading in the right direction, and I wish more companies would follow their lead. But I did tell her, with all honesty, that I hope that ULA embraces reusability. They're starting to. They're beginning to move in that direction. And I told her honestly that I hope that they do embrace reusability in the same way that SpaceX is, so that SpaceX has a legitimate competitor. Because right now, when it comes to heavy launch vehicles, they really don't. And that absolutely has to change, in my opinion, because with competition comes achievement. Until we're ready to take the next step, and until we're ready to stand on the shoulders of these giants of the space industry and these giants of space exploration that you've been watching throughout this video, and go where these folks have wanted the human race to go for a long time now. I tell you that with all honesty, having met Jim Lovell and Gene Cernan. We should have been to Mars a long time ago, or at least back to the moon. It hasn't happened, and it's going to happen soon. So until that happens, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.